Right. For the purposes of the recording, I'll just restate. Long-term forest plan, urban woodland plans, and woodland plans, 3 categories set by Scottish Forestry. Long-term forest plan and urban woodland plans are eligible for funding in the preparation of them. Woodland plans for areas smaller than 100 hectares don't get funding for a much simpler template to follow with them. Either a template that gives you thinning at the end of it, felling permission for thinning, or no felling, felling license. But first of all, before I go much further, I'd like to invite you folks to put something into the chat about why you're here. What are the issues that bug you about forest plans? What do you want to know more about? For example, I struggle with terminology, getting the words right and explaining why I think what I think needs done and why I think it needs done. Problem 2 is that when I change a boundary on a map, the area changes and I have to make sure that I copy the change into 3 different tables in the forest plan. So things can be time consuming, and the detail of it I sometimes get really frustrated with. So those are my bugs. What are your bugs? I'll give you a few minutes just to respond using the chat function if you're happy with that. Feel free not to say anything if nothing comes to your mind.
Sorry, I left you coming in there. You reading them as you go, Piers?
Yep, trying to. They're coming in thick and fast.
They are, which is great. Thanks, folks.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll continue and maybe just sort of respond a little bit to some of those questions as I go. Templates are difficult to follow. Quite often it's not your logic, and yeah, I have a trouble with them. At the same time, they're really good guide as to what Scottish Forestry are looking for and what you need to include as a bare minimum. A good plan will keep you focused, keep you accountable, and be clear on what your community woodland group wants to achieve for your site. It improves your access to grant funding, particularly forestry grants, and it may lay the foundation for your forestry grant application. And it may also be used for evidencing sustainability if you're going into Forest Stewardship Council certification, or if you're looking to supply wood to renewable heat incentive standards and conditions. But my suggestion is keep it as simple as you can without losing the detail that you need. That might be a quote of the day, who knows? Right, I'm just going to do a bit of screen sharing and give you the simple structure that Scottish Forestry expect of you? So Scottish Forestry guidance is that a plan is there to help you inform future management decisions and to guide management objectives. Your management plan must give you a clear and concise description of the woodland, a long-term vision of the wood, the objectives of management, your management proposals for the next 10 years. So 4 key headings, it's simple as that. Yeah, if only. Woodland plan is only as good as the information you put into it. That's how I look at it. And as it says here, your first job is to get a concise description of the wood, get all the background data together. And a lot of this is available online. Before you have to go into the wood, you can get a lot of data from online sources. Scottish Forestry Map Viewer is where I go to begin with. I will then look for designations on the NatureScot website. I will look at Historic Environment Scotland's past map. I will look at the online soils map for Scotland, etc. A lot of the data is there when you do the trawling around on the internet. And then when you need more detail, you have to get out there and do some more surveys. You have to look at what people are doing in the wood as well as what the trees are doing in the wood. Have you got an issue with car parking? Have you got desire lines opening up where people go walking or cycling? Have you got an issue with dumping? So the forest plan templates are all quite useful there, and they give you all the categories that you need to look for and set up, etc. And remember, one of the priorities is health and safety for you, for others, and the environment. And one of the maps I pulled together is a constraints map. It'll show you perhaps where the SBA is, the SSSIs. It'll show you your core path network for public access requirements. It'll show you your power lines, your wastewater pipes, your water pipes, any other features that might be a hazard, quarries, steep gradients, things like that. So that's a constraints map. It can get quite confusing when you try and overlap it with other things. And so you may need to produce more than one map to show the detail and to store the detail. For mapping purposes, just going quickly about mapping, I use a system called QGIS. There's a few other options out there. Some of this technology is not that accessible to people who are not familiar with doing maps in a digital format, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to present planners with hand-drawn maps. And so at some stage, I'm afraid you are kind of squeezed into using professional services if you can't get the quality of mapping that you need. Once you've got your constraints and you're beginning to collect data about the woodland, you might then produce a subcompartment map or a compartment stroke subcompartment map. For me, my guidance is that you adopt whatever subcompartment, whatever compartment boundaries were there in the past. What you've inherited from the previous owner, run with them if that makes referring back to historic information easier. Otherwise, start again, but draw your compartments along physical boundaries so that your compartments don't particularly change. The reason for this is that compartments work like a bit like an archive of information. It stores the information that what you're doing in those areas over a period of time, and it makes it easier to reference your management operations. It's a sort of forestry way of dealing with things when remembering names of places, or if your units need to be broken up and names aren't sufficient. You use numbers for the compartments and letters for the subcompartments. And the information is then stored in a spreadsheet that lies behind the subcompartment map. And that information, if needs be, you can copy out to a spreadsheet and manipulate. And remember, the fields are there to help you do the planning and to help give you the references to all the forms that you need to fill in the management plan. So make sure that your subcompartment spreadsheet has enough columns in it to set up your tables in the management plan. And you'll note that this is a spreadsheet in its infancy yet. It's got a lot more fields to go for yet.
Piers, could I just interject? Now we've had some people commenting about My Forest mapping service.
Oh yeah.
So we've got Murray has said, what about My Forest for maps? That seemed to be promoted for a while. Andy's saying, yeah, it's useful. Just free forestry mapping service. Don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I'll stop screen sharing for a minute, come out of that. And yes, My Forest is a great tool and it's developing all the time and getting better all the time. I was considering using it for a recent woodland plan that I'm working on, but My Forest doesn't yet have a urban woodland management plan template set up behind the scenes. So when it comes to printing out your management plan, it's only got a long-term forest plan template to work to rather than the urban woodland management plan template in the background. So there's still a bit of work for My Forest to do to get set up with all the options that are required by both Forestry Commission in England and My Forest, and Scottish Forestry in Scotland. So I'm still using QGIS, and I would like to have used My Forest because it would have given me the option to then let others in the community group get involved in the management process in terms of once they've got the login details for the My Forest account, then they can make changes where they need to, etc., or to view what I'm doing. So it makes it a little bit more interactive. So that's a little bit about gathering some of the data. Another important another important part of gathering data is in stakeholder consultation. No woodland sits in isolation, but so it's important to talk to your neighbours, talk to other organisations that have an interest in your wood. And from this, you will get something called an issues log. So you'll do the consultation, you'll get a lot of feedback, and you'll then need to analyse that feedback. And if I go back to screen sharing, I'll show you something of an issues log. You that's back to your some data. And so this is an issues log where you're asked to consider the issue and a quick description of what you've got in the pipeline, perhaps, and then what are the specific issues that have come from the consultees and how that relates to, in this case, population and human health. And then there's biodiversity, and there's a whole list of other issues in the background behind that. And so that is an important part of your data gathering for preparing your forest plan.
Piers, we've got another question from Andy Whiteman wanting to know, does every woodland plan require consultation?
No, but it will depend a little bit on your circumstance. For example, we have a little 19-hectare wood and it is well used by people. So we were expected to do a bit of consultation, and we could evidence that from having run a short open day. It doesn't need to be very extensive, doesn't need to be very detailed. It could be simply putting up a link to a survey form at the entrance to the woods if people are going in and out of one particular way, and and then you can gather some information. If your wood is not well used by people, but it is an important woodland for biodiversity, for example, and other organizations have an interest in it, then you will be expected to consult those stakeholders. So it may just be a quick conversation with the Highland Council, for example, in our area, the Highland Council and Nature Scott. So consult with those, or with the national park if you're within the national park, and they can provide some feedback, say how your plans, how your woodland might fit within their strategies, and that's the limit to your stakeholder consultation that's required. So yeah, get some guidance from your woodland officer at the time that you apply for preparing a woodland plan. Right, you've got your background data. Now let's go to visions. This is a vision that was written some time ago now for the Anagach Woods. Have a quick read of it and then tell me what you think. I'll give you a few moments to consider that vision. Can I stop screen sharing now? Have most people read it? Okay, I'm going to stop screen share. Have you got any comments on that vision?
Would you like people to come and to raise their hand to respond to that, Piers?
Yeah, or just chip in on the chat function. So I'll carry on. There's some good pointers there. I too find that vision somewhat detailed. It could be simpler. A lot of the principles could be wrapped up in the vision in some way. And if not, then some of those principles would be more appropriate stuck in a later part of the plan that refers to management practices. So the vision could be let's say about the timescale for your vision. Your timescale needs to be at least 20 years. So you're looking 20 years down the line. Or if you want to be more thorough than that, then you could go 7 generations or 200 years, for example. And don't be restricted by the 20-year vision, but make sure that that is covered within your vision for the woods, and how that then relates to your management principles and practices later on in the plan. I'm going to go back to screen sharing, just talk a bit about objectives. So your vision is the broad picture of where you want to go. It's your sort of, this is where I think we want to be in 20 years' time. Your objectives are how you get there. And your objectives are expected to be specific. Other terminology might be SMART. So they're specific in terms of location, they're measurable in terms of area, they're assigned as to who will do it, they're relevant to the aims, and they're time limited. When are you going to do them? So SMART is a useful acronym for thinking about objectives. But on the other hand, look at these objectives. Do you think that they meet the SMART criteria? And you're all scratching your head maybe, and I would be scratching my head too. Sometimes I look at these forms and think, oh, I'm just gonna say my objective is to build. If I want to be smart, my objective needs to be I'm going to build so many hectares. Are we going to build so many meters of path in such and such a location? It'll be done in this such and such a year. And the indicator of objective being met is path complete. So it's pretty straightforward in that respect, but is that more detail than is required when you then repeat it within your other parts of the plan? As you go down through the template, you'll find yourself repeating some of that detail. So it's worth going through the forest plan template and working out where that detail needs to be applied and where you can get away with putting in less detail in sections. That's how I see it anyway. Not everyone is going to test you on the SMART criteria for your objectives. So in some ways, keep it a bit more general, keep it a bit more flexible, and make sure that the detail is applied later on your forest plan maps. And bear in mind again that within terms of timescale, if your management plan is going to give you a felling license, then that needs to be for 10-year period. They won't give you a felling license for more than 10 years. So keep your objectives and what you're going to do concise to the 10-year period. Leave the longer term visioning to the vision. Elsewhere in the forest plan, they look for silvicultural and other strategies. And when they're talking about strategies, it might be in relation to, it might be a bit more like your aims. How are you going to, you've got your vision. What are your strategies to help you get to where you want to be on each particular topic, on each particular activity? And so in relation to making the woodland more accessible, your strategy might be to create a path network by simply opening up some routes by vegetation management. So no firm path building, just some desire lines opened up and managed in a bit more of a thoughtful way. Or your strategy might be to upgrade existing paths in order to make the paths more accessible to wheelchair users, for example. In relation to biodiversity, it might be clear fell areas and replant with native broadleaves, retain areas as long-term retention or non-intervention areas. And so that's a sort of broad brush application of your strategy to biodiversity or silvicultural management. In relation to woodland skills in the community or enhancing woodland skills in the community, it might be to create space for work sheds that you can use for training and a firewood enterprise. So those are your broad brush strategies for getting to where you want to be. And from that, you can then develop more concise objectives. Remember that when you're doing your forest plan, include deer and herbivore management, and you might be doing this as a separate standalone deer management plan, just to pop that in as a separate heads up on deer. Don't forget about the deer. So having got that far down the plan, we've collected data, we've talked to stakeholders, we've got an agreed vision, aims and objectives. We stated the management activities, and now we're at the stage of writing out the detail of what we're going to do within the 10-year period. This is where your jobs list is going to come in handy, and you need to try and translate your forest plan into an easily read, easily accessible work program for everyone to be able to follow. We've developed that slightly with our little Oldcastle wood list. So we have a list of jobs and a list of activities, and this is a simple sort of do it list for the year. And we can translate, and that's a little form that we can take from our forest plan and know that it's backed up by a vision, and it's all part of getting to where we want to be in the long term. The detail that you need for a long-term forest plan when it comes to felling and harvesting is in terms of producing something like this. This is a production forecast to tell Scottish Forestry what you're doing in terms of felling and thinning, what your replacement species are going to be, what the area is going to be that you're replacing the felled stuff with, and an indication of perhaps the volume that's coming out if it's significant. And so that's the form that Scottish Forestry use to just double check that what you're felling is being restocked and you're not losing areas of woodland to open ground, etc. And that's just one of the tables that I find quite difficult to construct using the subcompartment information that I've developed behind all of my mapping software. So that for me is still a bit of a bug in my system of creating a comprehensive forest plan. This table, when it's translated onto a map, or when the map is translated to that table, looks a bit like this. And a note about mapping: Scottish Forestry really like it if you use the standard colours for operational years. So red for the first few years, orange for the next, yellow for the next, and green for the final bit of felling. So you're looking, and this is 10 years in detail and another 10 years in broad brush, just to give them an indication of what you're doing in terms of breaking up the forest into felling coops, what you're then going to replant, etc. So that's what a map looks like for your felling, and there will be a similar one for restocking, etc. And also a standalone one for thinning if it overlaps a lot of what you're doing with the felling map. So the felling is about clear felling, and a thinning map is about thinning, and the restocking is about restocking the areas that you've felled. I'm going to come out of screen sharing and just talk a little bit about monitoring. So you've done your detail in the forest plan, and then you need to consider how you're going to monitor what you've done, because after 5 years, you will be expected to produce a review of your long-term forest plan for Scottish Forestry. And then if you want to apply in 10 years' time for a revision of that plan and get funding to redraft or redraw the plan, then you will need to produce some evidence of what you've done over the year. So it's very useful to have a system of monitoring that tracks what you're doing, whether you've achieved objectives. And in this, I find, again, it's really useful to keep it simple. And don't get too caught up in too much detailed monitoring. Make sure your objectives are fairly simple. Make sure that your monitoring reflects that and gives you the information you need to track your progress against your objectives. And in this respect, rather like artificial intelligence, your route map for where you want to go is only going to be as good as the information you put into it. So you keep feeding the results of your work, your activity, and you then get more information as to how well you're doing. And you remember those cycles for management planning, and you do your survey, you write your plan, you carry out your work, you then monitor and you review your work, and then you plan again. And so you have this cycle of work that goes on around your forest plan, and you keep it live and you keep it relevant. It's probably enough of what I want to say about monitoring, except it's quite good practice to then set up the forms that you want to record stuff in your forest plan, so that it's kind of in one location. For me, and I know I'm really guilty, this is something I'm really rubbish at, is having the forest plan there as the document that I'm referring to all the time. And it's useful to have your a summary of your reporting in your forest plan. It may be how many deer did you shoot in each year, and you've got all of that data in your forest plan, so you can easily do your reviews and you can easily write your reports on progress. So deer might be one number that you collect, the volume of trees felled, and maybe how many dodgy and dangerous trees did you deal with in the year. Sometimes how much did that cost? Particularly with dealing with dangerous trees, you need to evidence from time to time that you've dealt with them. If someone comes up and says you're not doing your inspections or you're not taking any action on dangerous trees, have you got the evidence there to demonstrate that you have been doing that and you've been keeping up with your obligations with respect to health and safety? Yeah, I'm going to go quickly back to screen sharing and then give room for more questions at the end. So there we go. There's a nice technical map, felling map. And this is what we thought we were starting with. This is what Scottish Forestry guidance was. We've got the 4 clear bullet points. That's all that a forest plan needs to be. And we're saying yes, but also it needs stakeholder consultation and issues log. It needs analysis of opportunities and constraints. It needs management strategies for each key issue. It needs a production forecast. It needs monitoring and monitoring records, and it needs tolerance tables. I might say just within the template, there are some standard tolerance tables. And if you drift away from those, from your stated objectives, then you need to consult Scottish Forestry. For example, if you get a big bit of wind blow and you've got to clear up that big bit of wind blow and change your harvesting schedule, then you need to tell them about it. And you can either agree it verbally and get a written letter to confirm that they're happy with you to change your plan, or you need to submit a proper plan revision, and you'll get a revised forest plan and revised production forecast, etc., and restocking schedule. So that's what the tolerance table relates to, and you don't really have to worry too much about it. It sits there at the bottom of your template, and it doesn't really need any editing, but you need to be aware of at what stage you need to inform Scottish Forestry about any changes to your plan. I think that is all I needed to say at this particular junction, and there's some useful links there. We do have a information sheet on preparing a forest plan up on the Community Woodlands Association website under our resources information sheets. A lot of the guidance is there in Scottish Forestry as well, and help is never far away if you really do get stuck, in terms of contacting me or contacting your woodland officer or other foresters who you've worked with in the past. We're going to share all these links with you, and we can share the presentation at the end, so these links won't be lost to you. I'm going to come out of screen sharing and invite any more questions to see if anyone's got anything else they would like clarity on. So we've got a good 20 minutes for questions, and between us, Jen, Sharon, will pick up some of your questions out of the chat, but also if anybody wants to speak up, then raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Hopefully I've explained what a tolerance table is. Is that clear? Guidance on tree inspections. It's an interesting one. Yes, I would say that once every 3 to 5 years, if you've got a lot of trees that are very mature and you've got some issues that you need to take into account, then yes, get a qualified surveyor to come in and give you the lowdown on some trees. And you might then be able to monitor them yourselves in between times. But make sure that your inspection is recorded and that any action to monitor or deal with problems is properly logged. And where things are critical, then you get someone in to deal with them.
Murray has his hand up, Piers.
Okay, Murray, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi.
Good evening.
Hi, Piers. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Thanks for all that. That was very useful. Just sticking with the tree safety inspection side of things, that issue of recording it and documenting it is interesting to us. In terms of, is that sufficient just to save that on our files, or are we expected to kind of send that somewhere and submit it to someone to help demonstrate that we've done it, or is it just a question of making sure you've saved it somewhere?
Keep it on your files. No one requests it of you until there's a problem, and then you may need to provide it as evidence that you've been doing your inspections and taking action where it's necessary. And it needs to be reasonable and responsible to the situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. That's helpful. I think as I briefly explained in the chat, we've done quite a lot of work on a management plan, but not quite got it over the line yet, which is significantly my fault because it's just tied up with too many other things. But we wanted to attend tonight just to give us a little bit extra motivation to get us that final stage. There's still some sort of technical forestry issues that we find challenging, like estimating the volume of a tree. And I can imagine if you're doing sort of simple felling coops, there's a degree of simplicity around that makes it a bit easier. Whereas if you're thinning, how we're working in an urban woodland where it's covered by a tree preservation order, and the council still disappointingly seems to view it very much as a individual tree needs a permission kind of basis. So how can we're keen to kind of get beyond that by agreeing the management plan so that we can get a lot agreed at one time. But that whole issue of what's reasonable, we've got a situation where there's mature oaks that are surrounded by beech trees that are definitely too close, and one of the things we want to do is to remove some of the beech trees to allow the oak canopies room to expand. But how many is it reasonable to take away at one time? How do we write that down? How do we agree it? Is it phased over 1 or 3 years? It's quite technical forestry kind of stuff, and that's probably where we need a bit more advice and guidance.
Yeah, that is quite a specific situation when you're dealing with a TPO as well as trying to get permission for or agreement on your woodland plan. I think my response would be to keep things fairly general in your woodland plan. Give them some indication as to how many trees you want to take out, what you think is reasonable. Push them to the limit maybe, and they can always come back to you and say, we're not happy with this. Because bear in mind that after you've prepared your forest plan, it'll go direct to the, or the Highland Council will then see it when it goes on the Scottish Forestry public register. So they will have another opportunity to come back to you, even though you've been talking with them in the stakeholder process. When the plan goes onto the public register, they will be able to respond to it and comment on the plan then. And my understanding is that even if you've got a woodland plan and they agree to that, every intervention you make within a TPO, you need to then put in a TPO application to do the work. So each year, and I do the same for a campsite at Rothiemurchus. You know, we've got the general forest plan. It's not at all specific about the campsite area, but every year I've got to do a inspection of the trees, write down a prescription for what we want to do. And sometimes they're pretty good at saying, yeah, we totally understand that. I think what they like to see is a clear vision, what you're trying to do, and what you're trying to achieve with your wood. If they're happy with your vision, then it shouldn't be a problem getting your TPO. That's my understanding. And one of the sticking points with, to be honest, with the campsites we have to apply year on year, because everything is a little bit responding to market forces in the campsite, and certain work will go on, and so the plan has to adapt a little bit more to changing management at the campsite, which keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, for let's say an urban woodland management plan, would it be something like the number of trees per compartment per year over a 10-year period, or would they expect volume, calculations as well? Because that's where it gets tricky for us.
When it comes to calculating volumes, I would talk with a couple of foresters, and I might be able to give you some guidance, but I'm never good at numbers off the top of my head. But if I looked at some felling tables or some individual tree volume tables, I might get an idea as to what a big oak would be or a big beech tree in terms of volume would contain in terms of cubic meters or tonnage, and then you can keep it fairly general. You can say, if I'm going to take out 5 of these understory beech trees, each one might be 0.5 of a cubic meter in volume, or if they're bigger than that, they may be 1 cubic meter in volume, and so just multiply by the number of trees you're going to take out. Individual tree assessment isn't entirely necessary if you've got a rough idea as to how much branch wood is included in that as well. It's all, for me, it's all fairly academic when it comes to a small urban woodland like that. It's more about the number of trees and what you're hoping to achieve in terms of the vision. You want to try and restore it to a native woodland. You want to get the beech trees out.
Piers, there's another couple of questions there as well, and then I'd like to give Jen 5 minutes at the end just to summarise the final slide, if that's okay.
Looking down the chat list, what have we got?
Fiona's asked a question about deer. Would you include those if you had deer sometimes wandering around, or would it be more for deer living or breeding in the woodlands? Is there documentation or support for what would be needed or included?
Yeah, with respect to deer, if they're using your woodlands at all, you need to add that to your woodland description and mention something about you will monitor the impact of deer. Your woodland may not be suitable for hunting in. You can't safely cull deer within your woodland, but your neighbours may be able to. And then it's a matter of stating in the plan that you work with your neighbours and liaise with your neighbours, and the culling might be done outside your woodland perimeter. But all the time you will be monitoring, and if needs be, then you'll put up tree guards, tree shelters, or fence off small coops to reduce the deer impact if deer are having a significant impact on your objectives. If you've got a bigger woodland, then you might want to write a deer management plan and apply for funding to help you manage the deer numbers within that woodland. That will be either through a native woodland grant or through a sustainable forestry grant for securing natural regeneration associated with low impact silviculture practices or something like that. So there'll be times when you need a standalone deer management plan, and there'll be times when you can just incorporate a brief description into your forest plan, but try not to shy away from talking about deer. Make sure that it's included because they will be having an impact somewhere along the line, and rabbits and hare might also be relevant. In terms of the public register, our woodland grant scheme applications and felling license applications, I know that WGS applications go onto the public register, and I know felling license applications go on the register. But if you're submitting your plan for approval, then it will, for a felling license of any sort, then it will go on the public register. So it may only be that if you do a simple woodland plan without thinning, and therefore you're not needing a felling license, it may not go onto the public register. I would need clarification on that. And I think everything else goes on the public register. Because at the end of the day, it's being assessed for a felling license as much as anything.
Thanks, Piers. I'm just actually adding your email address into the chat so that if anyone else has any further questions, they can ask them directly to you, if that's okay. Mary's asked for your email, your mobile number. Jen, I wonder if we can pass over to you before we finish. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Piers, would you be able to go put back to the last slide so that I can just run through it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We know that there's a mix of people here, so both members and non-members. So just wanted to run through, highlight a few useful links. So the recording of the presentation tonight, a link will go onto our website, and that's it there at the top. And I've put all the links into the chat, so you should be able to access them right away. But we will circulate the presentation, or the presentation will go on the website, sorry, so you'll see it there. If you could complete the evaluation form, and that's the link there, that would be really useful to us. As Sharon and I said, we're just new into post, so it's all a bit of a learning curve for us at the moment. So that would be very helpful. For people who aren't currently members of the Community Woodlands Association, we would very much encourage you to become members. So there's the link there for our website, which has got loads of information on it. I was just absolutely amazed when I first went on it. We also have a monthly bulletin that we send out and a quarterly newsletter that we send out. And the quarterly newsletter is all about the woodlands. You know, it's all about you guys and what you're doing, and it's a great chance to share and just be more of a sort of a connected network within Scotland. So the link's there if you would like to sign up for that. There's a link for how to become a member. So we have individual membership and also group membership. Also, we have our conference coming up. That's a 2-day conference happening in Glasgow at the end of September, the 29th and 30th of September. Would very much encourage you to get involved with that. That's the link there. There's lots of information about it. And we also have a Google group for members to join, which is a really good forum for people to ask questions and share information and suggestions. And then finally, this is all our social media links that we're on. And if you want to tag us into anything with the hashtag Community Woods, we can repost and share any social media posts that you put up. That is my spiel. Thank you very much, and thanks to Piers, because that's been great, and I think everybody's got benefit from this session. Shannon, will I pass back to you to do the final word?
Thank you everybody for attending tonight. It's been great your company. Piers, thanks very much for really comprehensive but easy to follow. As a lay person, I managed to follow that and write comprehensive notes. So well done. Thank you very much for that. And folks, as I say, if you've got any questions, I've put Piers's email address there. Please just drop him a wee line and he'll get back to you when he can. Thanks again, folks. Much appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Are either of you able to stop recording?
I think, hold on. Yes.